My name is Jason Brooks. I am 35 years old. Last Tuesday morning, my mother called me for the first time in almost a year. Not after my company completed the downtown renovation project everyone in town had been talking about. Not after I bought my first house with my wife. Not after she skipped my anniversary without so much as a text. She called because she saw a photo of my new Porsche, a $135,000 911 Turbo, parked in my driveway, shining under the late spring sun. I had posted one picture with 2 words beneath it, worth every mile. I did not post it to brag. I posted it because 10 years earlier, I was the kid borrowing tools from neighbors and driving a truck that barely started. That car was not just a car. It was proof that I had survived every person who underestimated me, including the people who raised me. Still, when my mother's name appeared on my phone, some old part of me reacted before the adult part could stop it. My chest tightened. My hand froze over the screen. Sophia, my wife, looked up from the kitchen table. She saw the caller ID and immediately understood. We had been married for 2 years. My parents had missed the wedding. Since then, my mother had contacted me only when someone needed something repaired, paid, or explained away. I answered anyway. Mom. She sounded almost cheerful. Jason, honey, we need to have a family meeting tomorrow night. No greeting. No apology. No mention of the months of silence. Just a meeting. About what? I asked. Your brother. Brandon. Of course. Brandon Brooks, the man my parents had chosen over me so many times that eventually I stopped counting. What happened? I asked. My mother sighed like the weight of the world had been placed directly onto her shoulders. He is in a difficult situation. Financial. The silence lasted just long enough to confirm it. That is not something we should discuss over the phone, she said. Your father thinks it would be better if everyone came to the house tomorrow at 8. Everyone. I knew what that meant. My brother, his wife, my parents, my aunt, who had always believed family loyalty meant the most successful person paid for the least responsible one. Maybe even a family friend or two, because my mother loved an audience when she wanted to look reasonable. I leaned against the counter and looked through the kitchen window. The Porsche sat in the driveway, the same car that had apparently reminded my mother she still had another son. Mom, I said carefully, when you say everyone needs to come together, do you mean everyone needs to pressure me? Her voice sharpened. Jason, do not start. There it was. The tone I remembered from childhood. The warning that my questions were the problem, never the situation that created them. I am asking a simple question. Your brother needs family right now. I almost laughed. Family. That word had always worked differently for Brandon than it did for me. When Brandon needed money, family meant sacrifice. When I needed support, family meant understanding why everyone was busy. When Brandon messed up, family meant second chances. When I succeeded, family meant staying humble and not making anyone uncomfortable. I will think about it, I said. Jason. My mother's voice softened again, which was always more dangerous than anger. Please. You have done well. Everyone can see that now. This would not hurt you. There it was. The Porsche had become evidence. Not of discipline. Not of hard work. Not of years of stress and risk and sleepless nights. Evidence that I could afford to be used. I will be there, I said. Her relief came too quickly. Thank you. Brandon will appreciate it. I doubted that. After we hung up, Sophia stood and walked over to me. Are you going? I nodded. Yes. To give them money? No, she studied my face. Then why? I looked toward the hallway that led to my home office. In the bottom drawer of my desk sat a folder with my grandmother Evelyn's name on it. Months earlier, I had started something in her honor. A fund. A legal structure. A plan that had nothing to do with Brandon and everything to do with helping someone in the family who still had time to build a different future. My parents thought the Porsche meant I was available. They thought success had softened me. They thought old guilt would still open my wallet. They were wrong. Tomorrow night, I would walk into the house where my wedding invitation had once been ignored, and I would bring something they never expected. Not revenge. Not a blank check. A door. And once it opened, nobody in the Brooks family would be able to pretend they did not see what was on the other side. The morning after my mother's call, I arrived at the office before anyone else. The building sat beside one of our largest construction projects, a mixed-use commercial development that had taken nearly 3 years to complete. Through the windows, I could see crews beginning another day of work. Concrete trucks rolled through the gates. Supervisors reviewed plans. Progress happened everywhere I looked. It should have been satisfying. Instead, my mind kept returning to Brandon. Specifically, to the fact that my mother had not called in 11 months until she saw a Porsche in my driveway. The pattern was almost impressive in its consistency. Whenever Brandon succeeded, my parents celebrated. Whenever Brandon struggled, they organized support. Whenever I succeeded, they admired it from a distance. Whenever I struggled, they reminded me that life was not easy. Looking back, the favoritism was impossible to miss. Brandon received a dirt bike at 13. I received a lecture about responsibility. Brandon totaled his first car and was given another one within months. When my truck broke down in college, I worked nights and weekends to replace it myself. Brandon changed majors 3 times before dropping out. My parents called it self-discovery. I started a construction business from a borrowed trailer and a handful of tools. My parents called it risky. Somehow Brandon was always the investment and I was always the gamble. Around 10 o'clock, I walked into a meeting with several project managers. They discussed budgets, timelines, permits, and staffing needs. Listening to them reminded me how far my company had come. Hundreds of employees, multi-million-dollar contracts, developments across 3 states. The funny thing was that none of it happened because someone believed in me. Most of it happened because people doubted me. Doubt can be powerful fuel if you learn how to use it. During a break, I found myself thinking about Grandma Evelyn. She was the exception to almost every rule in our family. While everyone else focused on Brandon's potential, she paid attention to effort. While everyone else talked about talent, she talked about discipline. When I was 17, I spent an entire summer helping her repair an old cabin she owned near the lake. One afternoon, while we were replacing rotten boards on the porch, she asked what I wanted to do after graduation. Build things, I told her. Real things. She smiled. Good. Good. I asked. Most people spend their lives talking about what they want to build. She handed me another board. You actually do it. Years later, when I started my company, she became the first investor. $5,000. It was not a large amount, but she gave it to me without conditions, without lectures, and without comparing me to Brandon. More importantly, she gave me confidence when I needed it most. By noon, memories kept surfacing. Birthdays, holidays, family dinners. Every event seemed to follow the same script. Brandon received attention. I received responsibility. Brandon received rescue plans. I received expectations. At the time, I assumed that was simply how families worked. It took adulthood to realize that healthy families celebrate more than one child at a time. Late that afternoon, Sophia stopped by the office. She found me sitting alone in the conference room reviewing paperwork I had not actually read. You are thinking about tomorrow, she said. That obvious? Only to someone who knows you. She sat beside me. Tell me one thing. What? In every story about Brandon, what is the ending? I thought about it for a moment. Then I laughed. Someone saves him. Sophia nodded. Exactly. The words lingered long after she spoke them. Because that was the real issue. My family had spent decades creating a system where Brandon never experienced the full consequences of his decisions. Someone always stepped in. Someone always covered the gap. Someone always absorbed the damage. And now, after seeing my Porsche, they had apparently decided I was next in line. What they did not know was that my grandmother had spent years teaching me a lesson my parents never understood. Helping someone build a future is very different from rescuing someone from a pattern. Tomorrow night, everyone in that living room would expect me to write a check. Instead, they were about to learn what Grandma Evelyn believed was the difference between charity and opportunity. The following evening, I left work early and started the drive toward my parents' house. The farther I drove, the more memories surfaced. Some people think painful memories fade with time. In my experience, they simply become quieter. They wait for the right moment to remind you they are still there. Seeing my mother's name on my phone after nearly a year of silence had opened a door I normally kept closed. And behind that door was my wedding day. The day I finally stopped expecting my family to choose me. Sophia and I had planned our wedding for over a year. Nothing extravagant. Just a beautiful ceremony surrounded by the people who mattered most. Invitations were sent months in advance. My parents confirmed immediately. Brandon confirmed too. My mother talked constantly about decorations. My father promised to arrive early and help greet guests. For once, everything seemed normal. For once, I believed they would show up. Then, 2 weeks before the wedding, Brandon called. I have a problem, he said. I was reviewing blueprints when the call came through. What kind of problem? I asked. The youth racing championship got rescheduled. His son had been participating in competitive kart racing for years. Apparently, the final event now landed on the same weekend as my wedding. That is unfortunate, I said. What are you going to do? The silence told me the answer before he spoke. Jason, this is a huge opportunity for him. I leaned back in my chair. Brandon, he has worked all season for this. Brandon, you understand, right? I understood perfectly. 3 days later, my mother called. The conversation lasted less than 10 minutes. It only took 2 for her to explain that everyone would be attending the racing event instead. Everyone. My parents. Brandon. His wife. Several relatives. Apparently, my wedding had lost another competition. Mom, I remember saying, you are seriously missing your son's wedding? She sighed as though I was being unreasonable. It is not like we wanted this conflict. You made a choice. Jason, you made a choice. The silence that followed was uncomfortable because it contained the truth. On the day of the ceremony, I stood near the entrance watching guests arrive. Friends, co-workers, employees, mentors, people who genuinely wanted to celebrate with us. Yet 4 chairs in the front row remained empty, reserved for my parents and brother, empty from beginning to end. Sophia found me staring at them before the ceremony started. You okay? She asked. I nodded, then shook my head, then laughed because I did not know how else to respond. They are really not coming. She slipped her hand into mine. Then we stopped looking for them. It was one of the smartest things anyone had ever said to me. The ceremony was beautiful. The reception was incredible. Friends danced. Family members from Sophia's side welcomed me completely. By every reasonable measure, it was a perfect day. Yet every now and then I caught myself glancing toward those empty seats, looking for people who had already decided not to be there. The next morning, my mother sent photographs from the racing event. Brandon's son holding a trophy, everyone smiling beside him. No apology, no acknowledgement, no recognition of what they missed. Just pictures. Looking back now, I realized that was the moment I stopped chasing them. Not entirely, not overnight, but something important changed. Expectations disappeared. Hope became smaller. Distance became easier. A car passed me, bringing me back to the present. I realized I had reached my parents' neighborhood. As I turned onto their street, I immediately noticed vehicles parked along both sides of the road. Family members, friends, witnesses. My mother had gathered an audience. Exactly what I expected. The moment I pulled into the driveway, I saw people watching through the front window, including Brandon, the golden child himself. Waiting, hoping, expecting. I shut off the engine and sat quietly for a moment. 7 years earlier, they skipped my wedding to support Brandon's family. Tonight, they expected me to support Brandon again. The irony would have been funny if it were not so predictable. I stepped out of the Porsche, straightened my jacket, and walked toward the front door. What nobody inside that house understood was that they were about to ask me for help based on an old version of Jason Brooks. That version no longer existed. The second I stepped into my parents' living room, I realized this was not a conversation. It was a performance. Chairs had been arranged in a circle. Relatives occupied strategic positions around the room. My aunt sat beside my mother. 2 longtime family friends occupied the sofa. Brandon stood near the television wearing the expression of a man hoping sympathy would arrive before accountability. My father remained in his favorite recliner, looking as though he already regretted participating. An empty chair waited in the center. For me, of course. My mother greeted me with far more enthusiasm than she had shown in years. Jason, we are so glad you came. I smiled politely. I had a feeling attendance was important tonight. A few people chuckled. My mother ignored the comment. Once I sat down, the meeting began immediately. Nobody asked about work. Nobody asked about Sophia. Nobody mentioned the construction company. They moved straight to Brandon's crisis. My brother launched into a prepared explanation. Economic challenges, rising costs, industry pressures, market conditions. Listening to him was fascinating because every sentence described something that happened to him instead of something he caused. Accountability never appeared. Over the past year, Brandon had purchased expensive vehicles, taken luxury vacations, and ignored repeated warnings from financial advisors. Somehow none of those details made it into the presentation. After 20 minutes, he finally arrived at the point. The business needs help. My mother immediately leaned forward. Your brother has always worked hard. I nodded slowly. How much? Brandon hesitated. $200,000. Silence filled the room. Even though everyone already knew the number, hearing it spoken aloud changed the atmosphere. $200,000 was not a favor. It was a rescue mission. My aunt spoke first. Jason, you have been blessed. One of the family friends added, and things seem to be going very well for you. My mother nodded toward the driveway. The Porsche certainly suggests that. There it was. The real reason for the meeting. Not family. Not concern. Not connection. A car. They saw the Porsche and assumed it represented available money. Nobody seemed interested in the years required to earn it. That is interesting, I said. My mother frowned. What is? Nobody has asked a single question about my company. Several people shifted uncomfortably. Jason, this is not about you, my mother replied. That is exactly the point. The room became quiet. I looked around slowly. How many people here know how many employees I have? Silence. How many know how many projects we completed this year? More silence. How many attended my wedding? The atmosphere changed instantly. My mother's eyes widened. Brandon looked away. My father stared at the carpet. Nobody answered. Because nobody could. Finally, Brandon shrugged. That was years ago. For you. I kept my voice calm. For me, it was my wedding. Nobody rushed to defend themselves this time. Maybe because they knew there was no defense. My mother tried another approach. Tears appeared almost on schedule. Jason, we cannot keep living in the past. I almost smiled. Funny how the people who benefit from the past are always the first to demand everyone move on from it. Maybe, I said. But we should probably understand it first. My father finally looked up. What are you saying? I am saying this room operates on assumptions. I leaned back in my chair. The biggest assumption is that I owe Brandon something. My brother's expression hardened immediately. Do not make this complicated. There it was. The impatience. The entitlement. The certainty that my role in the story was already assigned. Actually, I replied, I think it has been complicated for a very long time. Brandon crossed his arms. So what is your answer? Everyone leaned forward. My mother. My aunt. The family friends. They all expected a simple response. Yes or no. Check or no check. What none of them understood was that the real decision had been made months ago. Long before the Porsche. Long before this meeting. Long before my mother suddenly remembered she had another son. I looked around the room and almost felt sorry for them. They thought tonight was about Brandon's future. They had no idea that my grandmother Evelyn's legacy was about to become the center of the conversation instead. The moment Brandon asked for my answer, the room leaned forward collectively. Everyone expected the conversation to move toward numbers. Loan terms. Repayment schedules. Financial rescue plans. What nobody expected was paperwork. Before I answer, I said, I need clarification on something. My mother frowned immediately. Clarification was rarely helpful to people relying on assumptions. What now? She asked. I reached into my briefcase and removed several printed pages. Earlier that morning, my attorney had forwarded them after reviewing public filings connected to Brandon's company. I placed the documents on the coffee table. Can someone explain this? Brandon's face changed the instant he saw the papers. That reaction told me everything. Explain what? My mother asked. She picked up the documents and began reading. Halfway through the first page, her expression shifted from confusion to concern. Brandon, she whispered. My father sat forward. What is it? Apparently, I said calmly. Certain lenders were given the impression I might personally guarantee portions of the debt. The room froze. My aunt looked stunned. One of the family friends quietly looked away. My father stared directly at Brandon. Is that true? Brandon rubbed the back of his neck. Not exactly. Then what exactly happened? I asked. He hesitated. I mentioned that my brother was successful. To lenders? Maybe. And I said family usually helps family. There it was. Not a promise. Not technically. Just enough implication to create expectations. My expectations. My credit. My reputation. My money. Offered without permission. My mother immediately rushed to defend him. I am sure he did not mean anything by it. I looked at her. That seems to be a recurring theme. Nobody responded. Because everyone understood what I meant. Intentions had always mattered more than consequences when Brandon was involved. A few uncomfortable minutes passed before the front door opened. A teenage girl stepped inside carrying a backpack and a stack of books. Lily. Brandon's daughter. 17 years old. Smart. Quiet. The kind of kid who spent more time building things than talking about them. She stopped immediately when she saw the crowded living room. "Sorry," she said. "I did not know everyone was here." "You are fine," I replied. She smiled politely and started toward the hallway. Then I noticed a university folder sticking out of her backpack. Engineering program. Top-ranked school. "Lily," I called. She turned around. "Yeah. Did you hear back from colleges?" Her eyes widened. "A couple." Brandon looked genuinely surprised. "What colleges?" Lily blinked. "The ones I applied to." "You already applied?" The fact that he sounded shocked was almost painful. He had no idea. No idea what his daughter had been working toward. No idea what was happening in her life. Lily quietly named one of the best engineering universities in the country. My eyebrows lifted immediately. "You got accepted?" She nodded. "Last week." "That is incredible." She smiled for the first time all evening. A real smile. The kind that appears when someone finally feels seen. Unfortunately, it did not last. My mother immediately waved her hand dismissively. "That is wonderful, sweetheart. We will celebrate later." Later. The same word people use when they never intend to prioritize something. Lily's smile faded. She nodded politely and headed upstairs. I watched her disappear around the corner. Then I looked around the room. Nobody seemed particularly interested. Brandon's debt remained the main attraction. The future of a brilliant young woman barely registered. And suddenly I felt something shift inside me. A memory surfaced. Grandma Evelyn sitting on her porch years ago, telling me that the best investments were not always financial. Sometimes they were human. Sometimes they were opportunities. Sometimes they were people who only needed someone to believe in them. As the conversation drifted back toward Brandon's problems, I realized something important. Everyone in the room thought they knew where this story was going. They expected a negotiation, a loan, a rescue. What they did not realize was that the most important person in the house had already left the room. And upstairs, completely unaware, Lily Brooks was about to become the center of a very different future than the one her family imagined. After Lily went upstairs, the meeting somehow became even more predictable. Brandon talked about debt. My mother talked about loyalty. My aunt talked about family responsibility. The family friends nodded occasionally, although they looked increasingly uncomfortable. Every argument pointed toward the same conclusion. Jason should save Brandon. Nobody seemed interested in asking why Brandon needed saving. The assumption itself had become the foundation of the conversation. Around 10 o'clock, Brandon finally leaned forward. "Jason." His voice carried obvious frustration. "What is your answer?" The room became silent. Everyone looked at me. My mother, my father, my aunt, Brandon. They all expected a decision. What they did not expect was a folder. Slowly, I reached beside my chair and picked up a black leather portfolio. The moment my mother saw it, relief spread across her face. Brandon smiled slightly. Apparently, they assumed I had finally accepted reality. She repeated. The room fell quiet. My aunt looked confused. My father sat forward. "What exactly is this?" he asked. I folded my hands together. 6 months ago, I established an education fund in Grandma Evelyn's name. Nobody spoke. "Why?" my mother asked. "Because she invested in me when nobody else would." The room remained silent. The fund currently contains $250,000. That got everyone's attention. I could practically see them doing the math. $250,000. Enough to solve Brandon's immediate crisis. Enough to pay debts. Enough to make tonight's problem disappear. My mother looked hopeful again. "Then maybe we can use part of—" "No," the word echoed through the room. Brandon's jaw tightened immediately. "What do you mean, no? The money is not available." "It is your money." "Correct. Then use it." I shook my head. "It already has a purpose." My aunt looked bewildered. "You would rather spend that money on scholarships than help your own brother?" "I would rather invest in opportunity than rescue a pattern." The room became silent again. Brandon stared at me as though I had switched languages. My father, however, looked thoughtful. "Who receives the scholarship?" he asked. "The first recipient has already been selected." My mother's eyes widened. "Already?" "Yes." "Who?" I glanced toward the staircase. "Someone in this house." Confusion spread instantly. Brandon frowned. My aunt looked around the room. One of the family friends seemed to realize what was happening before anyone else. "Who?" my father asked again. I stood up slowly. "Could someone ask Lily to come downstairs?" My mother's expression changed immediately. Lily. Yes. Brandon laughed once. Jason, what are you doing? I smiled slightly. Something Grandma Evelyn would have done. Nobody understood yet. Not my mother. Not Brandon. Not my aunt. Upstairs, Lily was probably doing homework, completely unaware that her future was about to change forever. Downstairs, an entire family was about to learn that the money they expected to save Brandon had already been dedicated to someone else. Someone whose dreams had been quietly ignored for far too long. My mother called upstairs for Lily. The room remained silent while we waited. Brandon looked annoyed. My aunt looked confused. My father looked thoughtful. The family friends seemed increasingly uncomfortable. Nobody had expected the conversation to go in this direction. A minute later, Lily appeared at the top of the stairs carrying her backpack. She paused when she noticed everyone staring at her. What is going on? She asked. Come sit down, I said. Slowly, she walked into the living room and sat near the couch. Her expression made it clear she wanted no part of whatever family drama was unfolding. Unfortunately, her future had just become the center of it. Lily, I began. Earlier you mentioned being accepted into the engineering program. She nodded. Yes. Did you tell anyone about the financial aid offer? She looked surprised. Not really. Brandon frowned. What financial aid offer? Lily glanced toward him. The university gave me a partial academic scholarship. How much? My father asked. About 50%. The room became quiet. Even with a scholarship that generous, the remaining costs would still be overwhelming for many families. And how were you planning to cover the rest? I asked. Lily shrugged slightly. I was going to figure it out. The words hit me harder than expected, because I recognized them. I had said almost the exact same thing years earlier. Figure it out. Work more. Need less. Expect nothing. It was the language of children who learned independence before they learned support. I stood and picked up the scholarship documents. Lily Brooks, I said. On behalf of the Evelyn Brooks Builders Scholarship Fund, I would like to offer you our first full award. The room froze. Lily stared at me. What? Full tuition. Her eyes widened. What? Housing. A tear immediately formed. Jason, books. Supplies. Educational expenses. I smiled. Everything. Complete silence. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Lily simply stared at the documents as though they were not real. You are serious? She whispered. Very serious. Her hands started shaking slightly. Why? I thought about Grandma Evelyn. The $5,000 she invested when nobody else believed in me. The confidence she offered when everyone else offered doubt. Because somebody once invested in my future, I said. And because yours deserves the same chance. Lily covered her mouth. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Across the room, my father looked emotional. My aunt stared in disbelief. One of the family friends quietly smiled. Then Brandon stood up. This is unbelievable. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Dad, Lily whispered. $250,000. Brandon's voice rose. For college. For opportunity, I replied. That money could save my business. There it was. The truth. Not excitement for his daughter. Not pride. Not gratitude. Only frustration that someone else would receive something he wanted. I watched Lily's expression change. She understood exactly what she had just heard. And it hurt. Brandon, my father said quietly. Stop. No, he pointed toward the scholarship documents. This is insane. My mother immediately joined him. Jason, there must be another solution. There is. Relief flashed across her face. Good. Lily receives the scholarship. The relief vanished. Lily was crying openly now. Not dramatic tears. Quiet tears. The kind that come from relief after carrying fear for too long. I thought I was going to lose the opportunity, she admitted softly. Nobody said anything. Lose it? I asked. I did not think we could afford it. My chest tightened. A brilliant young woman had already started shrinking her dreams because she assumed resources would always flow somewhere else. You are going, I said firmly. That is not a question anymore. Lily stood up and hugged me. For a moment, everything else disappeared. The arguments, the pressure, the expectations. None of it mattered. Because right there in my parents' living room, one person's future had just changed. The strange thing was that the most important reaction came from my father. After Lily sat back down, he slowly looked around the room and asked a question nobody seemed prepared for. Why am I more proud of this than anything we discussed tonight? Silence followed immediately. Because for the first time, someone had finally asked the question hiding underneath decades of family favoritism. And the answer was about to make everyone very uncomfortable. My father's question settled over the room like a weight. Why was he more proud of Lily's scholarship than Brandon's rescue plan? Nobody rushed to answer because everyone already knew the truth. One option represented accountability, growth, and opportunity. The other represented another attempt to avoid consequences. My mother recovered first. "Robert, that is not fair." My father looked at her calmly. "Why?" "Because Brandon needs help." Lily needed help too. Silence immediately followed. My mother opened her mouth, searching for a response that never arrived. Brandon had no such problem. "This is ridiculous," he said. "Everyone is acting like I did something terrible." "Nobody said that," I replied. "You do not have to." He pointed toward Lily. "You are giving away money that could save my company. I am investing in her future. What about mine?" The question hung in the air. For years, someone else had always answered it. Tonight, nobody did. I looked around the room. My mother, my father, my aunt, the family friends. Then I realized something. This was probably the first time everyone had ever been forced to examine the pattern from outside it. "Can I ask a question?" I said. Nobody objected. "How many times have you helped Brandon financially?" Silence. My aunt looked uncomfortable. My mother looked away. My father stared at the floor. 3. I guessed. 5. Nobody answered. "More." Brandon crossed his arms. "What is your point?" "My point is simple." I looked directly at him. "How many opportunities does one person get before helping becomes enabling?" The room froze. My mother immediately shook her head. "Jason, that is unfair." "Is it?" I asked. "When my business struggled during the first year, nobody offered me $200,000. Silence. When I worked weekends for 3 years straight, nobody rescued me. More silence. When my truck broke down, when I could barely make payroll, when I was borrowing equipment from competitors, nobody organized a family meeting. The room became painfully quiet. My father finally looked up. "He is right." Everyone turned toward him. "Robert." My mother's voice carried warning. No, he shook his head slowly. "He is right." Something had changed in my father. Maybe it started when he saw Lily's reaction. Maybe it started years ago, and he was only now admitting it. Whatever the reason, he was finally seeing the pattern. "We always assumed Jason would figure things out," he said quietly. I laughed once. Not because it was funny, because it was true. "And Brandon?" One of the family friends asked carefully. My father sighed. "We always assumed Brandon needed help." Nobody argued because nobody could. Lily sat quietly on the couch listening to adults describe her family dynamic more honestly than they ever had before. Finally, she spoke. "Can I say something?" Everyone looked at her. "I do not want Dad to fail." Brandon's expression softened slightly. "Lily, I mean it." She wiped her eyes. "But I also do not think Uncle Jason should have to give up everything to stop it." The room fell silent again. Sometimes the clearest truths come from the youngest person present. Brandon looked away first. Not because he agreed, because he had no response. My mother sat quietly for the first time all evening. My father leaned back in his chair. Then he said something nobody expected. "Jason, I should have been at your wedding." The room froze. My chest tightened immediately. 7 years. 7 years had passed since those empty chairs sat in the front row. 7 years without hearing those words. "Yeah," I said softly. "You should have." He nodded slowly. "I know. No excuses. No explanations. Just honesty." And strangely enough, honesty felt more valuable than any apology. Eventually, the meeting ended. Brandon left first. Angry, frustrated, uncertain. My mother followed shortly afterward. The family friends made quiet excuses and headed home. That left me, Lily, and my father standing near the front door. Before I left, Lily hugged me. "Thank you," she whispered. "Make it count," I replied. "I will." I believed her. Outside, my Porsche sat beneath the driveway lights. Earlier that evening, everyone seemed fascinated by it. By the end of the night, nobody cared. The car was never the point. It simply revealed what people thought it represented. My father walked me outside. Before I got into the car, he stopped me. "Jason." "Yeah." "Your grandmother would be proud." I looked back toward the house, toward the family that had spent years looking in one direction, while someone else's future quietly waited in the background. "I hope so," I said. As I drove away, I realized something important. The meeting began because everyone believed I owed my brother another opportunity. It ended with Lily receiving one instead. And for the first time in a very long time, the Brooks family had invested in the right person. 1 year later, I stood inside the Evelyn Brooks Builders Scholarship Center watching a new group of students arrive for orientation. Some wanted to become engineers. Others planned to study architecture, construction management, or industrial design. Most came from families where college felt financially impossible. Looking around the room, I saw nervous excitement. Ambition. Potential. The same qualities Grandma Evelyn always recognized before anyone else. The scholarship fund had grown far beyond its original purpose. What began as a $250,000 commitment evolved into a full foundation supported by contractors, developers, local businesses, and former recipients. During the first year alone, we helped 14 students pursue careers in fields they once believed were out of reach. Every success story felt like proof that opportunity creates a better return than rescue ever could. Jason. I turned toward the familiar voice and immediately smiled. Lily walked through the entrance carrying a stack of engineering textbooks. Her first year at university was nearly complete. She looked completely different from the nervous teenager who sat in my parents' living room 12 months earlier. More confident, more certain, more herself. How were finals? I asked. Painful. Good. Good, she laughed. If engineering feels easy, you are probably doing it wrong. She rolled her eyes. I got an A in structural analysis. I knew you would. No, you did not. Fair point. We laughed together. Watching Lily grow over the past year had been one of the greatest rewards of my life. Not because I gave her success. Nobody can do that. Success still required her effort, discipline, and talent. All I did was remove a barrier. The rest belonged entirely to her. Around lunchtime, my father arrived. A year earlier, that would have felt unusual. Now it felt normal. During the months following the family meeting, we slowly rebuilt our relationship. Not through dramatic speeches. Through consistency. Calls. Visits. Conversations. Honest effort. You are here early, I said. Traffic was kind. He smiled and looked around the scholarship center. Students moved between classrooms and workshop spaces carrying project materials. Your grandmother would have loved this place. I nodded. I think about that a lot. My father changed more than anyone expected after that family meeting. The biggest difference was accountability. Instead of defending the past, he started acknowledging it. Instead of explaining mistakes, he accepted them. It did not erase old wounds, but it created trust. And trust is usually built from small actions, not grand gestures. My mother's journey was slower. Much slower. There were difficult conversations. Awkward holidays. Some apologies arrived naturally. Others sounded forced. Progress came in inches rather than miles. Still, progress is progress. Brandon surprised everyone most of all. Losing the business forced him to rebuild from the ground up. At first he resented me. Then he resented circumstances. Eventually he started examining his own decisions. That was when things finally changed. A few months earlier, he accepted a leadership role at another company. Last week he called me. Not for money. Not for advice. Just to tell me Lily had been selected for a prestigious summer engineering program. It was probably the healthiest conversation we had shared in a decade. Later that afternoon, Lily and I walked across the Scholarship Center campus together. Students sat outside discussing projects. Others worked in collaborative design spaces. Everywhere I looked, I saw possibility. Can I ask you something? Lily said. Sure. Do you ever regret not helping Dad? The question deserved honesty. No, she nodded thoughtfully. Because he caused his own problems? Partly. I looked toward a group of scholarship students entering the workshop, mostly because helping him would have solved one crisis. And this, she asked, this creates hundreds of opportunities. Lily smiled. That sounds like something Grandma Evelyn would say. That is probably because she taught it to me. We continued walking. As the sun lowered across the campus, I found myself thinking about my wedding day again. Those empty chairs. The disappointment. The realization that some people would always choose Brandon first. At the time, it felt devastating. Looking back now, it feels different. If my parents had attended the wedding, maybe I would have spent years continuing the same pattern. Maybe Lily would have quietly abandoned her engineering dream. Maybe the scholarship foundation would never have existed. Life rarely reveals its purpose immediately. Sometimes the moments that hurt most end up redirecting everything. My parents skipped my wedding for my brother. Years later, they saw my Porsche and assumed I would rescue him again. Instead, that moment exposed a choice that had been repeated for decades. For once, the opportunity went somewhere new. Somewhere it could grow. Somewhere it could change a life. As I watched scholarship recipients walk through the campus, I realized something simple. Money spent rescuing the same mistakes eventually disappears. Money invested in someone's future multiplies in ways you cannot predict. And every student who walks through these doors is proof that the best legacy is not what you keep. It is what you help build for someone else.